Does Bitcoin pollute the planet? This is a very hot topic, and you might even have read lots of articles about this topic in the press. Well, in terms of energy consumption, Bitcoin is huge. If it were a country, currently, it would be between Philippines and Kazakhstan. Imagine it would be a country between Philippines and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan being a very, very large country, according to the Cambridge Bitcoin Energy Consumption Index. According to this same index by Cambridge University, Bitcoin represents 0.14% of the total world energy consumption. And if we look just at electricity, Bitcoin represents 0.41% of electricity. So this is less than 0.5%. So in terms of volume, in total, Bitcoin energy consumption is significant. Even though Bitcoin uses a lot of energy, I believe that Bitcoin doesn't pollute that much. And I believe so for two reasons. The first reason is because Bitcoin mainly uses surplus and renewable source of energy. And the second reason why I believe so is because we should compare the consumption of Bitcoin to the consumption of the traditional financial system. And I'm going to explain you those 2 points in this video. Bitcoin using surplus and renewable energy, and that's why I believe it doesn't really pollute that much. And I even believe that thanks to that fact, Bitcoin even contributes to the development of greener source of electricity. Bitcoin is using surplus of electricity, so electricity that is produced but not used, for one very simple reason. It is that to mine, we want to have the cheapest electricity possible. And as we don't have any constraint to be physically in one place or another, this means that we can actually produce Bitcoin wherever we want on the planet, and therefore miners will choose the places where electricity is the cheapest. And guess what? Electricity is cheap when there is too much electricity for not enough demand. And this happens a lot when you have a renewable source of energy that can produce constantly electricity, but you don't yet have the population that is using it. Therefore, when you have a case like that, when you put in place a mining infrastructure next to this plant, basically you make this plant more sustainable because this plant can make more money than it would by just having the local population. And therefore, the reality is that mining projects and Bitcoin are actually favorable to the development of new plants that produce renewable energy. A very good example of that is what my friend Sébastien Gouspillot, a French entrepreneur that is a miner, is actually doing. He's launching projects in countries where they are starting to develop plants and infrastructure so that the population can have access to electricity. And thanks to this kind of project, we are making those infrastructure profitable or at least break even much earlier and from the start. Another way that surplus are used for mining Bitcoin, and which is actually very popular in the United States, is the use of gas flare. So in the petroleum industry, there are some gas that are actually produced and not used, and that could be used to produce electricity. And that's what is actually happening a lot in US. Some people start to put some mining rigs next to this production of gas flare, and therefore they produce Bitcoin with surplus, with an energy that wouldn't be used otherwise. Another very interesting thing to do is to compare the consumption of Bitcoin with the consumption of the traditional monetary and financial system. There is actually a very interesting paper on the topic that compares what is the energy consumption of Bitcoin versus the financial monetary system. I will show you some extract here, but I will also put the link here so that if you want to read the study, you can do it. So what I think is very interesting is that it compares the energy, so it explains what is energy also, so if you're not scientific, it's quite easy to read it. And it explains what is energy, and then it calculates the energy used for the traditional financial system. So for instance, it will take the energy to produce coins and notes, then the energy to transport them from a point of sale back to the bank. So all the physical way of using money. And then it will also include the digital ways that we already have to use money. So like credit card, point of sale, etc. So it does the sum of all that. And then what it does also, and what I think is very, very interesting and very striking, is that it also calculates how much energy is used by the banks themselves. Banks, it's buildings with aircon, with people going to the bank. And actually, if you look at this in more detail, what you will see is that the most parts of energy consumption from the traditional financial system, it actually comes from those banks. And what he did here, and what I think is very interesting to read, is mainly due to the commuting. So in total, he estimates that there is 4,981 terawatts per hour per year, and 3/4 of that actually come from employees commuting. And then he calculates what is the energy consumption of Bitcoin, and you end up having around 99 terawatt-hour per year of Bitcoin energy. But something important to remember is that not only, so in this study, but of course you should look at it in more detail and we could discuss all these parameters, of course, but roughly it means that the traditional system is basically using 50 times more energy than just Bitcoin. And the worst is that Bitcoin energy, as I said before, comes mainly from renewable sources or surplus. So we didn't have to burn oil like we do when we commute to go to a bank. Some may argue when looking at this study, but you're talking about the financial monetary system, the traditional one that is all the financial transaction in the world, with something that represents actually very small value. Well, it's a very legitimate argument. And actually, what is also interesting to see that there is an evolution of those two. There is an evolution of the traditional financial system that I hope is going down because we are using more and more dematerialized way of payment. And on Bitcoin, there is actually also an evolution. And this evolution is called the Lightning Network, which is a way to scale on the network in order to use much less resource to have much more transactions that we can do on the network. And you know what? Even if we didn't even have the Lightning Network, we could still use 4 times more the actual Bitcoin network to have 4 times more transactions. So as a conclusion, I would say that yes, Bitcoin is using a lot of energy. But fortunately, over time, this energy will enable us to do much more transactions. And this energy is still much less in comparison to the traditional financial system. And the good news is that also this energy comes from electricity, 100% of it, which comes mainly, actually it's estimated to 50 to 70% from renewable source of electricity. I know it's quite a controversial topic, so if you have some opinion, if you have read the study, you can write them in comments. I think it would be very interesting to have this discussion and to challenge potentially our figures together.